Thank you so much for all of you coming out tonight. And I've been having a tremendous week here in Overland Park. And you're a really, really neat community. I'd like to thank the college for this wonderful Scholar in Residence program. It really has been enriching me as a professional and as a person. And I want to thank Vincent Miller for all the coordination and organization and magical manifestation that has taken to bring me here. I'd also like to thank the professors and the students whose classes that I've had the privilege of talking in this week. There's Stephanie Zapato's graphic design classes, and there is Terry Erickson Harper's graphic design class. I also went to Sean Daly's cultural anthropology class, to Luz Alvarez's. She organized a lot of the Spanish students to come to the Spanish Club, and we talked today, and also Sandra Moran and Pat Decker's honors course. So it's been a very rich time, and thank you all of you for being here tonight. Please take more than one scallop shell. I had a good time collecting them this winter. The ocean was very generous, and I took it as a sign. When you walk the Camino, you start taking a lot of things as signs because you're reading the signs all the time. And it's amazing how they show up right when you're thinking about, I need a sign. And they're not all that frequently spaced. So, before I start with the slideshow and talking about the Camino, which, let's see, there we go, this should do it. All right. There we go, waking it up. How many of you have walked the pilgrimage road to Santiago de Compostela, the Camino? Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Anyone else? 7. How many of you are thinking of walking the pilgrimage road? Woohoo! All right. All right, you guys need to pair up because it's nice to talk to people who've done it. And how many of you have seen the movie The Way? All right. Okay. I love that movie. I think it rang very true to the experience. And it's also, you'll have your own experience, obviously, and walk it your own way. And that's a part of the beauty of the Camino, the pilgrimage road to Santiago de Compostela, the Way of St. James, the Chemin de Saint-Jacques. All those names refer to the same thing. And I'd like to start with some stories about the road, the way, that are archetypal stories for me. These are people I met. I've walked the road many times, different routes of it, not just the Camino Frances, which is the most popularly walked road, and there's reasons for it. It's a pretty tremendous road. But there's also the Northern Atlantic Road. There's the Portuguese Road. There's the original road from Oviedo in the center of northern Spain to Santiago de Compostela. There is the original Celtic pagan road from Santiago de Compostela to Finisterre, which we can talk about that too as well tonight. There are the 4 main roads in France that join all the networks of roads from further afield in Europe, and then eventually pour themselves into these tributaries, these 4 tributaries in France, and then they pour themselves over 2 passages over the Pyrenees mountains, and then they eventually can join into one great river. So I've walked a lot of stretches of a lot of those. I've walked some in the other direction. When I walked the Camino Frances, the main road, I walked it as much in a line as in circles and in spirals, and because I was researching it as well, but also when you walk the road, you want to follow your own instinct about how you walk it. And I had this instinct. I wanted to take the detour to another pilgrimage site, which was also a part of the medieval road. So let me begin with the 4 stories, though. And these all took place when I did actually walk the Camino Frances, the most popular road across northern Spain, which is represented by the orange, the second orange from Pamplona to Santiago de Compostela, and a little jog over the Pyrenees, where the green line goes. I was finishing up a stretch of walking the Camino Frances, and I had already arrived in Santiago de Compostela. And I was getting a train back to Pamplona to start walking into stretches that I hadn't gotten to yet. And this was when I was researching the spiritual traveler Spain. And I saw this man standing on the platform, and I was immediately riveted. He was this huge, towering man, and he had crazy wild man hair, just thick curls of brown blonde hair, and then his beard was matching that. It was just, and he was towering, and his backpack was even bigger. And it was one of those old army issue canvas packs that had all kinds of loops and pouches. And he had a cooking tent, a cooking stove, a tent, a cooking pot, a skillet, a tin mug, utensils for cooking, sleeping roll. And when he would move, and walk, he sounded like a herd of cows who were coming home. And I just thought, oh man, I hope I get to talk to this guy. He's got a story. And he wound up sitting behind me on the train, and it was assigned seating on this train. And I just turned around immediately and said, all right, I want to know, where did you start walking? Who are you? What did you do? And he said, well, my name's Dieter. And Dieter started walking from Lübeck in northern Germany. And he'd walked 1,400 miles. He entirely relied on himself. So if he couldn't find a pilgrim's hostel to sleep in, he just, set it all up from what he was carrying on his back. This is very unusual. Most people will carry a sleeping roll and a rain poncho, and then they're good to go, and they will hope to find a pilgrim's hostel along the way. So I said, well, what inspired that? And he said, well, I was going to propose to the woman I loved, and that week she broke up with me, and my heart was broken. And I was working long hours at my job. I was working long hours in school. He was full-time in both. And I realized that I was just on a course for a train crash. This was just too intense. And when she broke up with me, my heart broke so much. I didn't think I could ever love again. And I just knew that work and school weren't important. So he quit it all. He sold everything that he owned except for his laptop, which he left with his ex-girlfriend, and was worried on the train if he was going to get it back. And he opened the front door of his apartment, which was already rented, closed it, and started walking. He was the old-time pilgrim. I mean, in the Middle Ages, if you were going on pilgrimage to Jerusalem or Rome or Santiago de Compostela, that's the way you did it. And he just trusted the road, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked. And of course, the burning question in my mind after he shared the story with me was, and how are you now? And he said, oh yeah, I mended my heart, and I discovered that I can love that intensely again. And I was afraid I couldn't, but now I know I can. And I know that I'll find another job, and I can go back to school if I want. And then he said that the hardest part for him was not the mountains at the Pyrenees, just above Pamplona, and not the mountains in Galicia, just before you get to Santiago de Compostela, but the great, vast, flat plains of the Meseta, in the center of the tablelands, in the center of Spain, the Castilla y León, because there you don't have any external distractions. You don't have so much landscape to keep you from your mind. And that's where he said he went crazy, and then he found his sanity. And he fell apart, and then he started to rebuild himself. So I love that story, because that says so much about the pilgrimage, medieval one or the modern one. And it says so much about what we can do if we want to. He's broadened the spectrum. The second story was Marie from Montpellier. She was 83, and she was a nun, and she had lived in her convent all her adult life. And I met her in and outside of, in a long Osebrero, which is in the mountains of Galicia. You're at the last quarter of the stretch of the pilgrimage road in northern Spain. And it was strange because I saw this peaceful woman walking with a small canvas rucksack and a walking stick she picked up from a branch along the side of the road and a plastic shopping bag. And you'd just see her walking along, and the bag would be swinging, and she'd be... And this is the way she walked from Montpellier all the way to Santiago de Compostela. And to add to it, every mile marker, in this case kilometer marker, that she passed, she would stop and she would tap it with her walking stick, and she would say a prayer, and then she would continue walking. And the thing about Marie that I still have no solution for, I have some theories, and they're out there, theories, because they have to be, is I kept passing her in one day. You know what I'm saying? And then I would arrive in the town that I was going to sleep, or in the village I was going to sleep, and she'd already be there. And she'd be sitting at a cafe table and sipping her tea, and she would look right at me, and it was like, I dare you to call me out. And I was like, is Marie bilocating? What's going on here? So but I loved that what Dieter taught me was, you not only walk it your own way, but you really go into the mess of your life, and you greet it, and you process it, and you look at things that scare you the most, and you come out woven and whole. What I learned from Marie was patience and pacing, and a bit of mystery, that once you're in the present and you're in your flow, a lot of things are possible. Then, after Pamplona, I met Javier from Argentina. And Javier was a university student at the University of Pamplona. And he was walking, as much as I was doing it in a non-linear fashion, he was walking in a very non-temporal fashion. He would, anytime he had a break from school, he would rush to the place he'd last left off walking, and he'd walk as much as he could, and then he'd catch the next local bus and go back to classes, and then he'd go pick up there. And he had done it 4 times like this. I mean, it's an obsession. Once you start thinking of walking the Camino, and then once you do, don't think you're going to get away with not going back and doing it again. It's going to bug you, and you're going to want that experience again. So here he was, just doing this. And he also had this ability to just sort of appear, like he was just popping into, from some invisible realm. And one day, I was coming over a rise, and I was looking down into the valley I was going into, and there was a shrine there, and I saw a man at the shrine, and he was smoking, and he was like this, and going back and forth, and then I noticed that his backpack was with him, but it was in a shopping cart, like the ones we have at our grocery stores. And he had a bunch of bags tied to the rim of the shopping cart. He had a modern rendering of the donkey, the medieval donkey. But I was wondering, do I go down right now? Because he's having a conversation, and I'm not sure if I want to be a part of that conversation. And Javier popped. He said, "Oh, I see you've met our permanent pilgrim." Permanent pilgrim? And he's like, yeah, this guy never left the road after he started walking it. He couldn't go home. He loved the experience so much, and he was so afraid of going back to the familiar and the old life that he just goes back and forth, and everyone feeds him and gives him cigarettes, gives him places to sleep. So I also learned this thing about trusting the road. Even if you're going to just stay on it forever, the road provides. So those are my 4 archetypal pilgrim stories. And Javier, what he taught me was you walk it your own way. Doesn't matter if it's a short jaunt, or if it's the other direction, or if it's in circles or in spirals, or out of time or out of order. Walk it your own way. So these are the 4 main routes of the pilgrimage road from France that flow into Spain over 2 passes, the Saint-Port Pass, which is on the east side or the right, and then the Valcarlos Pass that is on the left side. And that is the main road that's called the Camino Frances, and it's called the French road because a lot of French pilgrims walked on it, but also a lot of people from France who were resettling into northern Spain walked it. And then they opened businesses and inns and restaurants. And there is a lot of French influence in the north of Spain. There's a lot of other influences too, and I hope to get to some of those today as well. My first Camino was in 1995, and I didn't plan on walking it. I was on a bus with my husband in northern Portugal, and we were destined for Santiago de Compostela. But we passed landscapes like this, and in 1995, we were starting to become more and more aware of this ancient medieval pilgrimage road. But it really didn't have too much of a support structure built in. I think it was 1996 that UNESCO declared it part of the cultural heritage and patrimony. But my husband, who's very much an explorer and does trust the unknown, which is a wonderful asset, just looked at me and said, why don't we just get off the bus and start walking? Wouldn't that be fabulous? And I thought, yeah, that would be. And then we got off the bus, and the bus pulled away, and I went, oh, wait a minute. We don't have food, we don't have water, and and I had a really big backpack, and it wasn't meant for backpacking at that time. I was on an archival research trip in southern Spain, and we had met up, and we were going into Portugal, and I had my dissertation printed out in 500 pages, and I had archival materials Xerox copied, and they're all in this ridiculous faux leather briefcase. And I strapped that onto my backpack and started walking. And it was the most phenomenal experience, because this is what the pilgrimage is about. You walk it, you trust it, it provides. You have no idea how it's going to provide. And I really thought, there's no way it's going to provide. This is ridiculous. You know, we're in a remote part of the coast of northwestern Spain now, and there's no support structures yet for the pilgrimage road. But 3 hours later, and I'm no longer worried about food, I'm just thinking, water, water. And this woman was parked at the side of the road, and she had finished going for a hike in a natural park that was near where we were. And I stopped her, and I said, could you please tell us, where is the nearest grocery store or restaurant or cafe? And because we would like to buy some food and water. And she said, oh, it's easy. And she opened her trunk, and she pulled out a big bottle of mineral water, still sealed. She pulled out a couple sandwiches, and I was like, what's going on in that trunk? Yeah, but it provided. And then we walked a little further we were on this sort of finger of land. Galicia has a lot of fingers of land that jut out into the Atlantic Ocean, and we were on one of them that was very close to the town of Padron, and Padron is important for the pilgrimage road. That's where St. James the Greater's boat first arrived, and we will get to that, why St. James the Greater. But we found these 4 women walking in this little hamlet, arm in arm. 4 generations of women, 3 in black, 1 in color. She was the youngest. And they saw us, and they surrounded us. They were like, we haven't seen the likes of you ever. So, you know, where'd you come from? What are you doing? What is that ridiculous thing strapped to your backpack? and they made off-color jokes at our expense. And then they told us what direction to walk to find an inn that would open for us. It was only open in summer, but this was early spring, and give us a place to sleep. So we walked many more kilometers and found this inn, found the couple that ran it. They opened it for us. They opened one of the rooms. They didn't have hot water. They did have cold running water. They shared their dinner with us, which was grilled fish that the husband had just caught, red roasted peppers, and boiled potatoes, lots of butter. It tasted so good, and we learned their story. And when you start walking the pilgrimage road, it provides in ways you have no idea, but it will change you, and it will change you in magical and positive ways, and connect you with people in ways you never imagined. So that was my first Camino. This was some of our remote walking. But the pilgrimage road has been around in the current form that we understand it since the Middle Ages. It really began in the early 800s, probably 813, 814, is where we start the legend, the official legend of the pilgrimage road, Santiago de Compostela. It peaked in the 11th and 12th centuries, and there were a lot of good reasons for that. But a lot of people, this was the great adventure. This was maybe the one and only way in medieval Europe that you could bust out of your familiar life, leave town with a good reason. If you just said, I want to leave town and see what's on out there, everyone would go, well, no, you don't just do that. But if you said, I am going to walk to Santiago de Compostela, everyone's like, oh, yeah, you do that. And you say a prayer for me, and you're going to go to heaven, and this is great. So it was a way for people who, no matter how they felt about the formal organized religion, it was an opportunity for them to bust out of town and have a great adventure and meet people they would have never met anywhere else, except for on this great river of humanity. Let's get to St. James. St. James the Greater. Many of you I know probably have heard of St. James the Lesser, too. There are all these Jameses, and who's who, and why the Greater, why the Lesser. St. James the Greater is only called the Greater, and St. James the Lesser only called the Lesser for physical size. They were both in the 12, the top 12, the core group of disciples, but St. James the Greater was simply a bigger man. And apparently also had something of a temper, because we do have in the Gospels Jesus calling him and his brother John, the evangel, the sons of thunder. And they were the sons of Zebedee, fishermen in the Sea of Galilee. Among the first 3 or 4 to leave their nets and their fishing and follow Christ. And the scallop shell is a symbol of the pilgrimage road. I'll get to that soon, but he is wearing the scallop shell on his hat. He's wearing his pilgrim's cloak. He has his walking staff. And just take a moment to ponder the fact that he is dressed up as a pilgrim walking to his own tomb. That's kind of cool, huh? So, St. James, I started studying this very seriously. It required a lot of coffee. St. James the Greater is the patron saint of Spain. How did he get that? I mean, we know certain very important things about him from the New Testament, from the Gospels, and from the Apocrypha, but we do not know, we have no evidence that he went west. We have no evidence that he went to Spain or Portugal. We do know he was very important because he is always one of the first 4 to be mentioned in any of the Gospels of the disciples. He was present at many of the miracles that Jesus performed, and he was present at many of the miracles that Jesus performed both during his life and after his resurrection. So he's important, but there's absolutely nothing that we can pin textually on evidence that says St. James went to Iberia, to Spain and Portugal. But he could have. I mean, it was a part of the Roman world. There were great roads. But he probably didn't. And there's a lot of biblical scholars debate about this a lot, and they have some good reasons why. I'm be happy to address those later. But if he did, let's say he did go to Spain. He probably would have gone to Spain via Tartessos in the south, maybe through Seville to Merida, and then just walking that Via de la Plata, the north-south road, which is another route to Santiago de Compostela, a very important Roman road at the time. It brought minerals being mined from northern Spain down to the south, and then they would be shipped through the Mediterranean to the east. This is probably what he would have seen. This is just south of Avila. So this might have been the way he walked. And he eventually, according to legend, now we're really fully in the realm of legend and lore. The first mention of St. James in Spain comes from a text, I think it's from 803, from Lyon. And it may be the beginning of people starting to create this wonderful story about one of the heavy hitters in the New Testament. So if he then went to the northwestern Spain, he probably, there's in the legend and lore, there's this idea that he went to the coast. And this might have looked like a place that he had stepped foot on. And at that moment when he arrived there in this northwestern remote area of Spain, Mary came to him, Mother Mary, and she was still alive. She came to him in spirit form, and she said, "You go. You just, we all believe in you, and have courage, and sink into your mission in Spain." So he was encouraged. He went to places like Finisterre. Finisterre believes that he came there. And this is one of the Atlantic destinations that a lot of pilgrims go to today as well. And they'll burn their clothes once they get there. There's a good reason. They're really old and tattered. And then they buy new clothes, which is great for the clothing industry in this village. After 7 years of evangelizing in Spain, legend tells us St. James had 7 disciples. So 7 years, 7 disciples. He was a little crestfallen. He was hoping to have more. And he decided it was time to head home. But on his way heading home, he stopped in Saragossa. And I have a map coming up soon that'll point out all these places to put them on a map. But this is in central to eastern Spain. And he's making his way very close to Catalonia and the Mediterranean. In Saragossa, right where you see that dome, Mary came to him again. She's still alive in the Holy Land. And she came to him in spirit. And she brought with her a jasper pillar from the Holy Land. And she planted it right there and said, don't feel crestfallen. You've really done a great job, and you have no idea what seeds you've planted. So feel good about yourself. And then she evaporated. And at the top of the pillar is a statue of herself, an image of herself. And in the legend and lore, that pillar is still in the Basilica to Our Lady of the Pillar, Nuestra Señora del Pilar, in Saragossa, and she is the patroness of Spain. So you see how St. James is deeply woven into the fabric and the consciousness of the sacred in Spain. So Mérida is there, kind of in the south, near the border with Portugal. That might have been where he passed through. And then we have Finisterre and Murcia up there on the northwest coast. And then Saragossa, do you see Saragossa over there? And then he went home, which wasn't a good idea. It was a really bad idea because he was decapitated. He was, I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he was the first of the apostles who was martyred. And that might be why we don't have a lot of information about him. He was the first whose life was ended. Herod Agrippa had him decapitated in 44 AD. And then it starts getting even more interesting because he makes another journey to Spain. And this is how I'm going to give you the most folkloric and local version of this legend. This is what people in Galicia, the Gallego legend of northwestern Spain, this is how they say St. James came to their land. He was decapitated. His two closest, most dedicated disciples took his body and his head, and as this painting depicts, and put him in a stone boat that came from granite made from Galicia. And angels, not oars, guided the boat across the Mediterranean through the Straits of Gibraltar, up the coast of Portugal, and came to the town of Iria Flavia in Galicia. As they were journeying, right before they got to Iria Flavia, they would have most certainly passed the Celtic settlement of Santa Tecla, which is right at the border of Portugal and Spain, overlooking the Atlantic. They would have most certainly passed the Celtic Castro, or settlement of Castro Baronia, which is an unbelievably magical place. It's like a place where I just think it's just happiness. You just feel happiness when you're there. And then found this mooring post, which at that time was probably dedicated to the god Neptune, or it was a sun altar. It could have been both. And they tied the boat. This is now under the altar in the town of Padron. Padron is the old Iria Flavia, and it used to be on the coast, but now silting on the river, it's now a few kilometers inland. But this is now underneath the altar, so they open these doors right underneath the altar so you can see the original stone post that St. James's boat was tied to. And I put these here because in that moment that they tied up in Padron, they interrupted a wedding. And it was the Queen Lupa's daughter's wedding, and she was marrying a local boy. And now I love this next picture, because Galicia is traditionally a matriarchal culture. And this is a peasant woman in Galicia holding a church man in her hand. That should say a lot about the relative power of women and the church traditionally in Galicia. And well, Queen Lupa she was the queen of her land. This was a matriarchal country. And when St. James and his disciples interrupted the wedding, they startled the horse that the bridegroom was sitting on, and the horse bolted into the Atlantic Ocean. And then everyone was going, oh my God, they're drowning, they're drowning. And in that moment, St. James performed his first postmortem miracle, and he brought them back above surface, and they were covered in scallop shells. Queen Lupa saw this, and she said, no, this is good. This is powerful magic. And she gave permission to them to take him inland to a mound, a burial mound, and bury him there a few kilometers in and away from Padron. And that is now today, I mean, this is really cool because this really was a burial mound. It was a burial mound during the Iron Age Celts period. It was a burial mound during the Roman period. And then this is the place that, in legend, St. James, and then eventually his two disciples were buried right next to him. And that is exactly where Santiago de Compostela's church is. So when you go there today, just think about it. You're walking on an old burial mound. And archaeological excavations have actually confirmed that. There were two major ones. I think one around 1949 and the other just recently. And they both confirmed that there are a lot of tombs down there, sarcophaguses. And they didn't find one that says, you know, here's a guy without his head, or, you know, nice cut, you know, with the head next to him. But they did find the two disciples, and there are stones with their names engraved in it. And, you know, that could be a later effect. We don't know. We have absolutely no evidence, but why not? I mean, somebody could have found St. James's bones sometime in Holy Land and brought them over and buried them there. But this is a really nice story for how they got there. And I think it's a poetic story about a real truth that matriarchal Galicia was starting to see that they needed to negotiate with the new power, and that there was a more male-centered power arriving. And they were kind of cool and groovy. I mean, they were spiritual as well. So let's find a compromise. Let's save the bridegroom, but cover him with scallop shells, which is the ancient world symbol of the goddess. So these are a lot of legends and pieces that I've been putting together. So we sleep for a while, and we sleep for about 800 years. Yeah. So that's somewhere around 44 AD. St. James makes his way in the boat, gets buried in the Compostela or the Compostum. That's where Compostela comes from, and I'll get into that in a second. And this is what Europe looked like, Western Europe looked like in the year 814. Charlemagne had just died. And the Cordoban Caliphate, the expansion from North Africa of Berbers and Arabs, had established their own emirate in the south of Spain, and more than just the south of Spain in this year. I mean, they had actually gone all the way into France, but then were pushed back after 732. But in 814, this is what it looked like. And you can imagine, if you're in the kingdom of Asturias, you're between two megapowers. And they're probably going, hey, what have we got? You know, let's find something really good. You know, and in 813 or 814, a hermit named Pelayo, according to legend, had this magnificent vision of a field of stars across the sky. Think Milky Way. Because it really, you do follow it if you're walking it at night. It's magnificent, just the stunning Milky Way guiding your path. Followed these stars, and they opened a tomb. And he knew there was something here. Went and got the local bishop, Theodomir, and said, you know, from Iria Flavia, Padron, and said, you've got to come and take a look at this. The bishop went and looked, and he said, yep, it's confirmed. I see the signs. This is St. James the Greater's tomb. He got backing from the Pope, so we're good to go. And why not? It's a possibility. There's another possibility, though, and I love this part. There could also be a guy named Priscillian buried in that tomb. He was martyred in the 4th century by decapitation. He had two very devoted disciples. He most certainly would have been buried probably in that burial mound because he was actually from the place. Why was he martyred? He was an early convert to Christianity, and he had become a monk. But he was also saying, you know, but let me bring some of the pagan Galician spirituality into this too, because they can dance together. They do work really nicely together. And while we're at it, I'd like to just say this. This is Priscillian talking, not me. I think we really should let women be priests. You know, I don't know why you guys over there on the East are saying they can't. They have every right. They should be our equals. And while we're at it, I think we should stop eating animal flesh because that's really not good. It does something to your energy. And while we're at it, I think we should walk barefoot because to feel the energy of the earth directly in your skin is a very different relationship, and you will never live out of balance with the earth if you touch it. So, and he had a lot of followers, as you can imagine. I mean, I like these ideas. These are great. And he was saying there's no reason why they're not compatible with the Christian doctrine. But other people had other ideas, because they knew that if his followers grew, they would lose their power and influence, and they were also striving for that. So he was decapitated and buried. And when it came to saying, well, who do we got in the tomb? It's not likely they're going to go for Priscillian. Not if they're looking for a rallying point to get attention from one or the other power to say, we got something here. You know, we're holding our ground and we're anchoring. And while we're at it, why don't we bring a lot of people to visit this powerful place and repopulate the lands that have been depopulated or never were very populated. So, the first pilgrim to go to Santiago de Compostela was the king of Asturias, somewhere between 1818 and 1842, and he went from Oviedo in the center. There, do you see Oviedo kind of in the center of northern Spain? And he took that road that goes inland to Santiago de Compostela. And that made it kind of the first official pilgrimage in Spain. Outside of Spain, the first official pilgrimage took place from Le Puy-en-Velay in south-central France. And it was the local bishop there in 950. And then it just started getting more and more on the map. And then people started saying, you know, it's really more likely right now, especially in the 10th and 11th centuries with the Crusades, it's way more likely right now to go to Santiago de Compostela if we want to go on a pilgrimage. Jerusalem's a little more risky. And it's kind of this remote place. It was a great adventure. So more and more people started opening their front doors and going out into this world in one of the very few ways that people could bust out of the structures that held them in their societies. One of the results of this expansion of the pilgrimage road was, oh yeah, I love this part. The Cluny order, which were Benedictine, a Benedictine order in France, south, well, kind of in the Dijon area, is that, and they were receiving a lot of payment from the kings in northern Spain, who were starting to unify their kingdoms and creating this consciousness, this more unified consciousness as a Christian kingdom, or a group of Christian kingdoms. And it was a time where the south of Spain that was under Islamic rule was starting to fragment. They had done a great job of unifying, and then they were starting to fragment. Around 1031, they just sort of broke apart into these little city-states. And they started paying tribute to the kings in the north, because they were no longer really a power that could unify and hold their land. But the north was like, well, you know, if you pay tribute, gold is good. We don't really feel we need to spend resources to come and take land back, because gold is better. And so they started taking some of this gold tribute and sending it up to Cluny. And the monks at Cluny started paying for all these commissioning these great works of sacred art on the Camino to Santiago de Compostela. So they really created a fabulous network, infrastructure to encourage more and more pilgrims and more people to flood into northern Spain. And that is how a lot of French settlers went. And another beautiful thing about this is the Romanesque art. This is something that really peaked in the 11th and 12th centuries. And I love Romanesque art. I mean, I like Gothic too, but Romanesque comes right before Gothic, and Romanesque is funny. It pokes fun at our natures. It wants us to see our donkey nature as much as it wants us to see our angel nature. And it wants to be honest. It says, here's your shadow. You know, what are you going to pick? You choose, but here's your shadow. Are you going to be blind by the demons? Are you going to play with them? Oh, I love this one. This is at Conques in south central France. There used to be a scale arm and chains. So those are scales, and it's an angel and a demon. And they're weighing your good deeds and your bad deeds. And you see the demons cheating? He's trying to weigh it. Yeah, that's Romanesque art. It's very funny. A lot of the people who were the stonemasons and building these beautiful works of sacred architecture were also a very interesting mix. There are places on the Camino that there's no doubt that they had Muslims, Jews, and Christians building them, even if it's a Christian temple. And that's another thing I love about the Camino, is it is bringing this sort of universal expression. So these are some of my favorite examples of Romanesque art. Now, are you torn in your nature? Don't know which way to go? This is a depiction of Joseph's dream when, we don't know which one, when the angel came to him either in the Holy Land and said, get the heck out, go to Egypt, or if when they were in Egypt already and said, it's safe to go back. This is somebody from behind the veil checking in on you. You learn to share your lunch. I don't know, it's a good one. So that's the official Camino. That's the official Christian medieval Camino, which is pretty cool. But there are unofficial stories about the Camino that speak of it as a much older road that goes back to, some say maybe the Iron Age, others say maybe the Bronze Age, some say no, maybe the Neolithic era, the first early farmers of Europe, and others say no, this is, look at what's concentrated here. I mean, you've heard of Lascaux, the painted caves of Lascaux and Altamira. Atapuerca is an amazing archaeological site for human evolution where Homo erectus, Neanderthal, and early modern human bones have been found. This was an ancient corridor for a long time for us bipedal types. There was something there we just really liked. And I can tell you the climate and the food really, I think that's what was going on. And they walked this corridor many, many times before the Camino. And by the time the Camino came, there were already traditions in place from the Celtic Iron Age people and from the dolmen builders in the Bronze Age and from the early farmers in the Neolithic and their petroglyphs, and then in the caves that go even further back. And you see depictions of the Labyrinth. This is the oldest form of the Labyrinth. This one is from Syria, and it's in the Louvre Museum, but it's an exact, identical version of a labyrinth that you will find engraved in the stones in Galicia, very close to the coast, of the Atlantic coast, almost identical. And that labyrinth is 4,500 years old. And a labyrinth is very much like walking a pilgrimage road. You're on a single path doing a walking meditation. You're processing. These are some of the dolmens that you'll find near the Camino. And there's a lot of Celtic settlements as well. But whatever the time period, pagan, prehistoric, medieval, or modern, people follow the road, they read the signs, and those things are universal, such as the yellow arrow today. Or a kind person who knew that we were going to get lost and put stones down. So if you're inspired to walk the pilgrimage road to Santiago de Compostela, one of the best things first to do is not only follow the signs. Like I found these 2 matchbooks crushed on the ground before I was walking mine and said, hey, wait a minute, is that a message? And you get your credential, the pilgrim's credential. It's also called the pilgrim's passport. You grab a sturdy walking stick, like St. James, and a water gourd. You start walking. And as you start walking, your passport gets stamped in all the places that you stay. And that becomes really cool to look at later because you relive your journey and the people who stamped it, and the people you talked to, and the meal you ate. And you might begin walking in one of the roads in southern France or central France. This one's Conques. You might take the northern route, the Atlantic route. This is along the Atlantic coast in Asturias. You definitely will become a foodie because you'll be very hungry, and the food is really great. So is the wine. So is the shellfish. And most likely, most people do walk this road that I've highlighted in yellow here, except for that part over there. The really more common road is the one I should have highlighted from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, further to the left, coming over into Pamplona. But that's the route that I know best. I still have to walk the stretch from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Pamplona. I was going to do it, but a snowstorm came through. And if you saw the way, you know that it's a good idea not to walk that stretch if there's a snowstorm coming through. So this is the main corridor. This is the one that most people take. Here are the Pyrenees mountains. And it really, I mean, it just gets your heart excited to see landscapes like this and to go into them. And it can make you nervous too, until you start finding that every day the road meets your needs. And you start following the signs. And you pass over some of the most ancient corridors that shepherds took their sheep from the winter pastures to the summer pastures. This particular passage is the Saint-Porte Pass, and it's right after crossing the border with France and Spain, and they're still using it to move the sheep from the winter pastures to the summer pastures, or the summer pastures to the winter pastures, from the mountains and coming back into the lowlands. Nobody knows how old it is, but they're thinking 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years old, that people have been following their animals across this way, and they still get the right of way. So the bus we were in, because it was raining and we decided to, my husband and I did the stretch together, the bus pulled over and just let thousands of sheep go by. You might also find the Holy Grail on the pilgrimage road. There's a lot of legends of the Holy Grail. This is a replica of first century agate cup that in the Middle Ages they put an ornate handle and stem on. The original is in the Cathedral in Valencia on the Mediterranean coast. But there are a lot of legends, how did it get there? And those legends have filled numerous books. And then you get near Pamplona and you get to that point where all the roads become one. And in my case, I started meeting more people because I was going in areas that were a little less traversed. This was a South Korean couple that I met just outside of Pamplona. And I started meeting families walking together. They're not always just people. They took their dog, and the dog kept walking between the two of them. And I thought, that dog has walked the Camino 4 times already. And sometimes friends will meet up with you. At this point, I was walking by myself, but these are 2 friends who came and joined me for a part of the stretch. And you see monuments and reminders. This is the Sierra del Perdón. It's a place where people feel, it's the windiest part in Navarra. You've already passed Pamplona, and it really feels like the wind is taking away your baggage. It's just blowing it off of you. And people do. They release the things they don't want anymore into the wind. I love this one. This is Unate, E-U-N-A-T-E. This is most certainly a chapel that was built by Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And a lot of people believe it maybe was also built, it was commissioned and seen over by the Templar Knights because it's modeled after the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. But it's puzzled people because its name, Unate, is Basque, and it means 100 doors. And everyone's like, that's really, I don't know, I have no idea. And it's unusual because it has a cloister, but the cloister is like the rings of Saturn around this 8-sided round church. And no other church on the Camino does this. They have their square cloisters off to the side, but cloisters are a place for a walking meditation, just like a labyrinth. But that cloister has 33 arches. And when I was researching the Spiritual Traveler Spain guidebook that I wrote, and I'd come home and I had copious notes and I had finished walking the Camino, and I was puzzling over this. It was at that point in the chapter I needed to really sort out what was Unate, what could we best say about it. And this was the weirdest experience. I was sitting at my desk, and my grandfather's writing set was in front of me. It was this beautiful wooden carved inlaid writing set from Iran, and my grandfather was a writer as well. And I had just draped his prayer beads over it. And they were just draped there, and they just went and slipped out onto my desk. And I actually had never been using them. I just loved them. And I sometimes like to hold them in my hands. And I sat there and I said, wait a minute, let me count how many beads are on there. 2, 3, 4, 33. Well, Sufis, the mystical arm of Islam, will do a meditation on the 99 names of God with their 33 beaded prayer beads. They go around 3 times. And then they enter the 100th door. Unate means 100 doors. Cool, huh? And there's other things that I couldn't even begin to explain that have to do with sacred geometry and numerology that somebody who has studied the Kabbalah could say, yep. So it's really cool. And it's in the middle of nowhere in Nevada. This is the famous bridge in Puente la Reina. Before the queen had this bridge built, and I believe it was the 11th century, you had to cross this deep part of the river another way. And it was either somebody who would ferry you across, and were they honest? We don't know. Or they might have gouged you. There are stories in the Middle Ages of people getting ripped off or being pushed off the boat after the person has taken their belongings. And you pass through a lot of wine country, not bad. And more beautiful churches. This one, there are a lot of details here also that indicate it was built by Muslims, Jews, and Christians. And then you're starting to get out of the Pyrenees and the foothills, and you're starting to get to that meseta, that great tableland in the center. And you can see how your mood changes. It's a completely different landscape. This is the town of Sahagún. This is the cathedral in León. And you eventually advance to the mountains of Galicia. So you can imagine this part of the Camino in Spain it's like a parenthesis of mountains with a great tableland in the middle. And this is the cognitive map as much as the physical map that you're following. And this is what it looks like as you start going deeper into Galicia. And you do have to share the road at times with cows. And they're pushy. You step aside. And eventually you arrive at the edge of Santiago de Compostela, and you see a landscape like this. And many of you have probably seen this image. This is the cathedral. It is the more Baroque facade that protects the Romanesque original entrance inside, which is this, the Prtico de la Gloria. And St. James is the fellow with the cool crown of gems, and Jesus is sitting above him. And it's worth contemplating this entranceway because there's a lot going on, and they're all very colorful. I mean, these guys, you feel him strumming the harp. And then food, you fuel up because most people don't want to stop in Santiago de Compostela. And they are also really happy to find a place that has this much food piled up and wine and water. But a lot of people then continue on to Finisterre, to the end of the earth, the old earth, before we knew that there were other earths beyond this one, even in Western Europe. But they come here, and there are rituals here as well, where they take all their old clothes and their boots and they burn them now in controlled bonfires that the people of Finisterre oversee, and have a huge celebration. And it kind of feels better for them to end it here because they can't go any further without a boat or something. And that feels like more completion. And even Dieter said, it's like you're walking in all these tributaries that join the great river across northern Spain, and it's so finite but so magnificent and has its own energy that pulls you along, and then it dumps you into the ocean and you go from finite to infinite. And that, I think, is why it's a sense of completion for people to go all the way. Some people might also want to go down the coast a little to the town of Noia, which gets its name from Noah. And there are other legends in Galicia. This is where, according to Galician legends, that Noah's Ark hit Earth, and everybody got off. So there's a lot of other reasons. This is also the area of Finisterre and Noia and Murcia. There are some theories about the Camino that, and these are people, scholars as well as locals in Spain, in northern Spain, who say, we think that when Atlantis sunk, the survivors came ashore here and started walking the other way. So, I mean, a stone boat from the Holy Land or that, it's you can make your choices. Now, and I want to finish my talk about another walk that I made, and this is in southern France. This is on the Chemin d'Arles, and it's the road that would come from Turin, Italy, through Arles, through Montpellier, through Toulouse, and make its way to the Pyrenees and cross over at the Saint-Port Pass where you saw all the sheep crossing over. And last year I walked this with my friend Sarah, and we agreed that this was one. She also is just crazy for the Camino and has walked it several times herself in different ways. And we both knew that as much as we felt like old hands at the Camino, walking in the other direction in a more remote part of France in October when things start shutting down, it would be good to have a friend to muscle through the problem solving with. So we walked together, we walked the other way. The movie The Way had just come out, and everyone kept saying, "You're walking the wrong way," and we'd say, no, it's okay, we're walking the other way, and then we'd all crack up. So this sign is telling you that Arles is 549 kilometers away, and Saint-Jacques, which is the French name for Santiago de Compostela, Saint-Jacques de Compostela, is 919 kilometers. So we were really happy to be walking towards Arles. So what we did, these are the main routes of the pilgrimage roads throughout Spain and France. And what we did is we bridged from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Oloron-Sainte-Marie and then walked towards Toulouse. And just before Toulouse, we stopped walking. We walked about 2.5 weeks. So here's Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. There's something really fascinating about walking the other way in a more remote part and a less populated time, because you really are forced to read the signs a lot more carefully. And you also have to keep turning around and going, oh yeah, there's a marker. So this is our first day. We're leaving Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port and we're going into France rather than over the Pyrenees. We still have the Pyrenees foothills to cross, and foothills is such a mild name for what we had to do. So this was our first day. And it was nice that people still, would hang out the scallop shells and took time to put the markers. Somebody took the time to shave this tree and paint the markers on it. We didn't know, we also picked, the 3 weeks that we picked to walk, 2 of them were traditionally, especially in this part of the Pyrenees, in the Béarnais region, pigeon hunting season. Maybe you guys know this, I didn't. Pigeons from Africa who fly north for summer in Europe fly south back to Africa as winter starts to approach. And for some reason, this particular part of the Pyrenees is where they like to land and rest before they continue their flight to Africa. We were walking right in the heart of this particular area where the pigeons decided to land. And we kept seeing these signs, deer walkers, please don't make any noise. It is pigeon hunting season from the 1st to the 15th. Oh, it's more than 2 weeks, but everyone on the ground, we were saying it's really the 2 weeks you're walking. Thank you. 200 meters after that sign, we saw a sign nailed to a tree. Deer walkers. It is wild boar hunting season. Please make a lot of noise or you'll get shot. And my friend Sarah just said, wow, this is a 50-50 chance of getting shot. And our 4th day, we finally made it to Oloron-Sainte-Marie and had, again, we were going the other way. Things were shutting down. More things were shut down because pigeon hunting season meant all the people running the inns, the cafes, and the restaurants on our route were closing their businesses to go into the wilds and do their hunting and have a nice time off. And then we got to Oloron-Sainte-Marie, which is a bigger town, and found that there was a Portuguese convention, a reunion of families who had immigrated to France from Portugal, and there were no rooms at the inn. One innkeeper got on the phone and called an inordinate number of people until he found this woman who said, I do have a room. I've been turning people away because I'm really tired of cleaning my rooms. I'm just taking a break. And we got on the phone and we said, you don't have to clean our room. We'll even strip the beds, before we leave. And we had the best time because this wound up being where all the locals kind of came and gathered. And the guy behind me is a modern day troubadour. And he had all his instruments off to the side, and he was cracking us up. And then we started walking into a lot of, sometimes you have to walk back towards the Pyrenees to start walking away from them. In the town of La Commande, where this church is, we arrived again and found that the 6 bunks that were meant for pilgrims in the Pilgrim Refuge were filled. There were 6 pilgrims from Pau and Toulouse who had already taken them. And, but they put us up in the school's Red Cross room. And we slept in 2 really uncomfortable cots, but unlike the Pilgrim's Refuge that had a shower and a sink, we had 3 sinks and 2 toilets. And had a great time. But there was one guy, we got to know the others, 5 of the pilgrims, but one guy went to bed early and disappeared by 5 in the morning. But we kept saying, I wonder what his story was. He seemed sort of interesting. Now, the Camino is a mysterious way. And a sense of humor. There are places where the volunteers of the road will leave the Pilgrim's Refuge unlocked. And so you walk in, and there are signs all over the place in numerous languages telling you to walk quietly on the stairs, take your shoes off, put them here. If you're going to do wash, do it over here, put it outside. Please close the door upstairs to keep the heat in. Clean the bathroom. All these signs, including the honor system of refrigerator full of beer. I like this part. With a can and a slot on the top that, drop €1 in if you're going to drink a beer. And at 5:30, we will show up to open the store. And we're like, store? There's no store in this town. 5:30, these 4 guys pull up, and they're like, we are the friends of the chemin, and would you like to do shopping? And one guy even said it that way, and used the English word. And they opened a door to the side of the place where we were staying, and it was this little grocery store. And they followed us as we were picking out. No, don't take that bread. Take that bread. That's much better. Oh, that wine. Yeah, I picked that one myself. And we did some shopping. And then we went upstairs and dropped €1 into our can and had that beer. And it was just us. But this is in the town of Anoye, A-N-O-Y-E. It had room for about 15 to 18 pilgrims. And there were moments of just sublime peace and tranquility where we just stopped and said, wow, it's just so good to be alive. And humor, more humor. These guys just came running to us to say hi. And more humor. And looking behind you. And then towards the end of our walk, we were heading towards Montesquieu that night. And we were far further away than 3 kilometers at the time, but it started to rain, and it was really heavy, heavy rain. And then temperature started to drop. And no matter what rain gear we had on, we were just soaked. And Montesquieu seemed a lot further away than it should have been. And the roads were getting very muddy and slippery, so it felt like more effort to just make those kilometers. And when we finally got to Montesquieu, there were 2 refuges, pilgrims' refuges, and 1 very, very fancy, beautiful country bread and breakfast. The 2 refuges were closed, deer walker, due to pigeon hunting season. The one fancy B&B, the man opened the door, and he looked at us, and he said, oh, God, I'm full. And so we were thinking, what are we going to do? So I found this number for a taxi driver nailed to a bulletin board in this little village. And I called it, and he said, oh, my God. You're stuck in that place? I'm coming. I'm pulling on my pants. I'm feeding the dog. I'll be there. And I'm saying, thank you so much. And I'm about to say goodbye. And this time I'm traveling with my cell phone. I hadn't done that before. And thank God, and I'm about to say goodbye. And this couple drove up and they said, do you need a place to stay? And I said, hang on a second. And they said, we offer accommodation in our home because our children are grown and we have bedrooms that nobody's using. They were the most lovely couple. They took us in, they dried us out, they fed us dinner, we had dinner with them, we heard their stories. The husband is an engineer, and he works out of his home because of the internet, and he was having a meeting the next morning as we were leaving, and he had pajamas on, the pants were teddy bears flannel print. And then he had this very formal white suit, white shirt and tie. And as we were leaving, he said, un moment, s'il vous plaît. I love my job. Isn't this great? So this is when the rains started to come. And this is the room we slept in with Homer Simpson in a 15th century timber wall. The next morning, as we were getting on the road, they advised us not to go on the usual marked trail because the rains had really rained it out, and they were just muddy and really hard to pass. And he said, well, what do you advise? And they kind of looked at each other and they said, you should walk the old Camino, the old chemin. And I said, really? You mean the one that's marked is not? And they said, no, that's a convenience of the modern age to get people as close to where they need to go. But the medieval chemin actually goes this way and up along the side of that hill, because if it rained out in the Middle Ages, you didn't want to be walking in a place that took a while to dry out. And while you're there, pass by this chapel. It's only known by the locals. This chapel was one of those misto spots in the world. It's just a magical place. It had engravings like this on the inside. I mean, the guy has a fish body, and there's an ear. Is the bird telling him something, delivering a message, or pulling his ear? We don't know. I mean, aren't these guys great? Simple, but so elegant. And our last place before we got to where we were going to say goodbye, we had 2 more days of walking. We arrived in the town of Baran, known for its spiral steeple on its bell tower. And right as we entered the town, and we were seeing this beautiful view, and Sarah's going, oh my God, I think it's going to rain again. And there's this beautiful statue of Mary parting the skies. This group of 6 elders who were out on their afternoon constitutional surrounded us, just like those 4 Galician women back in 1995. Where are you from? What are you doing? How'd you get here? And they said, you know what? The Pilgrim's hostel is closed due to pigeon hunting. But there is a family in town that likes to play as host to pilgrims. And you just go down to the stop sign, see the red house, go a few more meters, make a right. You'll see the scallop shells. You'll know that these are the people who will let you in. They had the scallop shells hanging on their wall. It was the guy who got up early in the morning, 2.5 weeks before. And he opened the door and he said, what do I have to do to get rid of you? He had no idea we were walking the other way. And we had no idea that he lived on the chemin, the Camino. And we had a really, really good time and laughed hard. And the next day we walked to Auch, which is known as the birthplace of D'Artagnan, the 4th Musketeer. And we didn't know it at the time, but when we went to the cathedral, the Auch has a very powerful Mary. And a lot of people were coming to visit her and receive blessings and grace from her. So that is the Camino that I so far have walked. I've gained some insights in walking this. One of them is that you will be changed by who you meet. That's some of the magic of the Camino. You'll also be changed by what starts coming up inside of yourself, what starts bubbling up inside of you. At first you might go, oh, no, not that. Oh, I don't want to deal with that. But then the good part is it keeps passing through. And then it's out. And you've processed it. And in this wonderful, old, very old, ancient way of bipedalism, of just walking and letting your mind get in sync with your body and with the earth. I certainly found that walking the other way, but this is true for walking any direction, will teach you that if you start trusting yourself and you start trusting the world, a magic starts to show up that does uncanny things. You at first called it coincidence, and then by the end of the walk, you know it was pure synchronicity. There are also several narratives that are at work as you're walking. There is the dreams narrative of your dreams are incredibly deep and vivid. It's like you're having a feature film every night because you're tired and you've been walking in the outdoors and the sun's been on you and the wind, and you're really connecting to some very old rhythms. And so your dream mind, your subconscious mind starts going into those places. And you gotta write them down because they're powerful. There's the ailments narrative. You know, I got this many blisters, you know, and once I got past Pamplona, I got the runs, and then I got a cold in Leon, you know, and Pilgrims talk, they talk like that. There's the mental narrative of, wait a minute, I thought Montesquieu was closer than that. Okay, it's further away. No, wait a minute, I thought it was closer than that. You sort of just play with yourself, these mental games. There's the psycho-emotional narrative, which is the processing one that I was talking about earlier. There's the social narrative, who you're meeting, what other pilgrims are you meeting, who are the locals you're meeting, what are their stories. There's the cultural narrative of knowing you're traversing a land with very ancient traditions that are unique to themselves. And you're starting to just scrape the edge of them and go, wow, that was really interesting. And then there's the physical narrative, the one that's not the ailments narrative, but the one that says, I just did that. I just walked on my own 2 solid legs and strong back and shoulders, however many 100 miles, you know, and it's a really powerful experience. Another insight is that people are like mirrors to each other. And it's really interesting how it happens. You'll be thinking about something, you've been keeping it all to yourself. And a pilgrim just suddenly shows up, seemingly out of nowhere, and they tend to do that because you think you're out there by yourself. And the first thing out of their mouth is exactly what was going on in your head or a variation of it, and it just mirrors you, and you have to, it's like you have the opportunity to work with it right then and there. Even one day on the Camino is walking through a whole universe. So no matter how long or short your walk, just that one day, and I strongly recommend anyone who does this, keep a journal. Keep a handwritten journal, because it is a very organic process. And write down the details. Write down the little synchronicities, or if you want to call them coincidences, write them down. Write down the one-liners that somebody dropped as they passed by. When you go back and reread them, it will blow you away. It's a deeply mystical experience to walk in the footsteps of that many people who have walked before you for centuries and possibly millennia, and then add to it all the people who are going to come after you. It's a profound experience. It's an experience that I haven't walked the Appalachian Trail, so I can't speak to it, but I feel like it might be different because this is such an ancient road. And maybe one day the Appalachian Trail will be like that too. And if we could add some Romanesque churches to it, that would be fun. No one's Camino is what they planned it to be, especially for those of you who are planning to go. And you have a really good plan, and that's great. Go with it. But be prepared to loosen it up and cast it aside when you actually start walking, because the Camino will challenge you to give up your ideas, your preconceived ideas of how it's going to unfold. And if you release them sooner, the sooner you'll find the kind of magic that can come to you. And if you don't release them sooner, sometimes the Camino just has a way of sort of slapping you and saying, oh, you really want to walk 40 kilometers a day? Great. Well, let's give you a sprained ankle and some blisters, you know, and then you can slow down. And, you know, whatever, but that's very individual what happens. But no pilgrim has ever said it unfolded the way they planned it to. And finally, the entire road is dedicated so deeply to the truth that human beings seek transcendent experience. And it is a universal sort of transcendence that, you know, religion doesn't have the only key to. There's something, this is something really, really universal, and we're hungry for it. And that's what this road is dedicated to. And I think that might be why this is the one pilgrimage in the modern era of the famous world-recognized pilgrimages that people are still walking to the holy site. They're still taking days and weeks, and some, in the case of Dieter, months to get there. Whereas to go to Rome or Jerusalem or Mecca, people are flying in, taking a bus, and they might walk the few last kilometers to get there, but it's a very different approach to the sacred. And I think the Camino is so popular with so many people from so many backgrounds and walks of life, and spiritualities and atheists and deep, deep devout Catholic practitioners, because the road itself is the sacred destination. So I'd love to hear your questions and your thoughts and anything, put the conversation out there. Oh, and wait a minute, one little commercial moment. There's my book, there's my app, and there's my website. So, I don't know if you want to look at this while we talk, or if I should go back to the scallop shell and the path, but you can let me know if this is too much. Thank you.